Is this supposed to be a joke? The words sharp, dismissive, and dripping with irritation cut through the sterile, climate-controlled hallway like a blade. Petty Officer Second Class Davies stood rigidly, feet set shoulder-width apart in a stance. He had rehearsed dozens of times in front of a mirror until it looked naturally authoritative. His uniform was pristine, every crease sharp enough to pass inspection under a microscope. He stared down at the elderly man before him. Plain red-collared shirt, worn jeans, and the quiet stubbornness of someone who refused to dress for anyone's approval. In a corridor built on military order, he looked like an anomaly. "Sir," Davies said, voice tightening, "I'm going to ask you one more time. State your reason for being at the JITF Command Center." Carl Whitman, 81 years old, didn't so much as blink. He stood still as stone, hands clasped loosely behind his back, calm and unshaken under the younger man's scrutiny. Carl's eyes pale, clear, and steady weren't on the young security officer barking at him. They were fixed on the large screen at the end of the hallway. A bright, swirling weather map of the Caribbean glowed across it, shades of green and yellow twisting over deep blue. He'd seen images like that before, though back then they were drawn with grease pencils on acetate sheets, not rendered in real time by satellites. Same ocean, same dangerous waters. "I'm here to see an old friend," Carl replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, shaped by decades of salt air and hard years. Davies exchanged a dramatic, irritated look with the junior seaman beside him, a kid who barely looked old enough to shave. The younger man shifted nervously, painfully aware of how frazzled he looked next to the calm, unshaken stranger in front of them. "An old friend," Davies repeated, dripping sarcasm, "right? And this friend just happens to work inside one of the most secure intelligence facilities in the world." "He does," Carl said simply. At last, he turned his eyes toward Davies. There was no anger there, no anxiety, only a quiet, unwavering patience. "James Reynolds, Vice Admiral Reynolds." The name seemed to hang in the air. For a fraction of a second, Davies' smirk faltered. Uncertainty flickered, but he quickly buried it under routine skepticism. He'd dealt with this kind of thing before. Elderly visitors bluffing with big names, hoping to slip through security. It was practically a chapter heading in the training manual. "Vice Admiral Reynolds," Davies scoffed. "Sure, and I'm guessing the president is your old fishing buddy too." "Sir, I need to see your authorization. CAC, card, visitor badge, something." "I don't have one," Carl said. "They told me to give my name at the gate. Looks like the message didn't make it down here." "They didn't forget anything," Davies snapped, temper flaring. "There is no message. You don't just walk in to see the commander of JITF South like you're stopping by for lunch. This isn't a social hour." By now, people along the corridor had begun to slow down. Some pretended to check their phones, others paused mid-conversation. The hum of the building's electronics made the tension feel almost physical as a small, silent crowd formed. Carl could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't move. He'd endured stares in far worse places than a climate-controlled hallway. Davies felt the eyes too, and it only made him more aggressive. He saw an opportunity, a moment to prove himself. "Let me see some ID," he demanded. Louder now. "Driver's license, anything." Carl reached calmly into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He handed over his Florida driver's license. Davies snatched it and read the name aloud. "Carl Whitman, born 1942, he gave a mocking laugh. "You've been around the block, Mr. Whitman. Long enough to know you can't just stroll in here. Look, let me be nice. Why don't you let us escort you off base so you can go home and get some rest?" The condescension was almost tangible. Carl slid the license back into his wallet. He said nothing, and that the calm refusal to be rattled infuriated Davies more than any argument would have. "That's it," Davies growled, stepping closer, invading Carl's space. The seaman behind him shifted, hand hovering near his sidearm. "You're in a restricted area without authorization, refusing to comply, and falsely claiming ties to a flag officer. That's a federal offense. Some might even call it impersonation." Carl exhaled slowly. A deep, tired resignation settled in his face. "I'm not impersonating anyone," he said quietly. "I am who I say I am. And I suppose you're a Navy SEAL too," Davies mocked, throwing out the most cliché accusation he knew. Carl didn't reply. He simply held the young man's gaze. The lack of denial only emboldened Davies. "Enough. You're coming with us," Davies snapped. "Hands behind your back." He grabbed Carl's left arm. As he did, the sleeve of Carl's red shirt slid up, revealing the faded ink on his forearm, a tattoo, old weathered. The black ink had turned a bluish green over the decades. The lines were crude, hand-done, nothing like the modern SEAL tridents plastered on bumper stickers. It was a skeletal frog clutching a stick of dynamite. Beneath it were the letters UDT-21. Davies dismissed it as another fake, just a relic of someone chasing borrowed glory. But for Carl, the moment the tattoo was exposed, the world seemed to tilt. Suddenly the hallway dissolved. The sterile hum faded. In its place came the heavy growl of twin diesel engines. The clean scent of air conditioning vanished, replaced by the filthy, metallic temps of river water, mud, and gunpowder. He wasn't feeling Davy's grip anymore. He was feeling the slick mangrove roots under his palms as he hauled himself out of the Mekong's black water. He was 22 again, gun in hand, heart racing in the darkness. Then the vision vanished. He was back in the hallway, an old man being cuffed like a criminal, across the room. Ensign Malira Jr., intelligence analyst known for seeing patterns other people missed, had been watching the encounter with growing alarm. He was a history obsessive, a Naval Academy grad, someone who'd spent more time studying the origins of the UDTs and early SEAL teams than doing actual coursework. He didn't know the man in the red shirt, but he recognized something in the stillness, the bearing, the same quiet intensity he'd seen in photos of legendsmen like Rudy Bosch and Dick Marcinko. And when he saw that antique tattoo, he froze. Old, real, impossible to fake. When Davies pulled out the cuffs, Miller knew he had to act. Protocol said to stay out of it, but his instincts, those that made him a good analyst, were screaming that this was a catastrophic mistake. He lifted the secure phone on his desk, pulse hammering, and dialed a 4-digit extension he'd never intended to use. The line picked up immediately. Flag Aid's office. Came the crisp voice. Lieutenant Commander Phillips, speaking. Commander, Miller said quietly, keeping his tone calm as he turned away from the commotion unfolding in the hallway. This is Ensign Miller from J2, sir. I'm sorry to call you directly, but we have a situation at the main entrance checkpoint. What kind of situation? Phillips replied sharply. The Admiral's aide was in the middle of a critical secure video briefing and clearly not in the mood for interruptions. Security has detained an elderly civilian, Miller explained. He claims to know the Admiral personally. They're preparing to remove him and possibly charge him with impersonation. Phillips let out an irritated sigh. Security can handle that, Miller. We get plenty of crazies, sir. I don't think this one is a crank. Miller hesitated, then pushed on. He's calm, extremely calm. They're cuffing him as we speak. He gave his name, Carl Whitman. The line went silent. For 5 long seconds. Nothing came through except the faint hiss of the encrypted connection. Miller barely breathed. Then Phillips returned, his voice stripped of all impatience, replaced by a sharp, urgent focus. Whitman. Carl Whitman. Did you say Carl Whitman? Yes, sir. Describe him now. Elderly, maybe 80, white hair, blue eyes, red polo shirt. Another pause, heavier, more charged. Miller heard a chair scrape back, a door fly open. Ensign Phillips said quietly, every word vibrating with authority. Do not let them move him. If they try to escort him anywhere, you will intervene and tell them they are to stand fast under my authority. The Admiral is already on his way. Am I clear? Yes, Commander. Relief flooded through Miller. And Miller, God help those kids if they've bruised him. The line went dead. Miller turned back toward the hallway. Backup was coming. Inside the Admiral's soundproof office. Tension filled the room. Vice Admiral James Reynolds, a tall, lean man with a face like carved stone, was in the middle of a classified briefing with a dozen senior leaders. He was mid-sentence, pointing to an image on the screen, when Lieutenant Commander Phillips burst in without knocking, an unthinkable breach of protocol. Admiral, Phillips said, pale and breathless. He leaned in and whispered rapidly. The room watched the Admiral undergo a shocking transformation. The focused strategist froze, his arms still raised toward the screen. His eyes widened. All color drained from his face. He lowered his hand slowly. A single, stunned word escaped him. Carl. Phillips nodded. Security cuffed him at the main entrance. They thought he was impersonating someone. A storm lit the Admiral's eyes, an expression the room had only ever seen directed at the nation's enemies. Reynolds straightened to his full height, authority radiating from him like heat. Get my cover, he ordered. Voice low and dangerous. He didn't wait for confirmation. He strode out the door, leaving behind a room of stunned officials. The briefing was effectively over. Justice now moved down the hallway in the form of a 2-star admiral in immaculate dress whites. Back at the entrance corridor, Petty Officer Davies felt triumphant. The old man stood cuffed against the wall, and the watching crowd only fed Davies's certainty that he was doing the right thing. Dispatch, he said into his radio. S2. I have a 10 to 15 at the JC entrance. Elderly male. Transport needed to base security for processing. Possible stolen Valor. He cast a judgmental look at Carl, who remained still, gaze lowered, shoulders slightly sagged. What Davies assumed was shame. You people disgust me, Davies muttered. My grandfather served. He earned that uniform. He didn't lie to impress anyone. Men died for that honor you're pretending to have. He leaned in closer. We'll run your prints. When they come back, you're going to answer for this. Maybe we'll get you a psych evil. See if you've got all your screws tight. Carl finally looked up. For the first time, emotion flickered in his eyes, not anger, but pity. Then it happened. Not with a siren, but a sound-sharp, rapid footsteps echoing down the hall. Dress shoes hitting linoleum with purpose. The crowd stiffened. People straightened instinctively. Parting down the center of the corridor, First came the Admiral's master gunnery sergeant, a man whose ribbons looked like a museum display. Behind him moved Vice Admiral Reynolds, cutting through the fluorescent light like a blade. His face was a thunderhead. His eyes locked on one man, Carl Whitman. Davies froze, panic washing over him. He snapped to attention. Admiral on deck. He shouted, voice cracking. Reynolds didn't return the salute. He didn't even acknowledge Davies. He walked right past him, stopping in front of Carl. His eyes fell on the cuffs around Carl's aged wrists. The Admiral's face turned to stone. Slowly, deliberately, he looked at Davies. Petty officer, Reynolds said, his voice soft but deadly. Explain this. Davies swallowed hard. Sir, this civilian entered a restricted area. He claimed to know you. I believed it was stolen valor. I followed protocol. You followed protocol, Reynolds repeated, the words heavy with condemnation. He didn't look away from Carl. Master Guns, remove those cuffs. The sergeant stepped forward immediately, unlocking the restraints. Carl rubbed his wrists, gently. Then Reynolds did something that made the entire hallway stop breathing. He stepped back, snapped into the most rigid attention of his career, and delivered a salute so sharp it practically sliced the air. Master Chief Whitman, he declared, voice echoing off the walls. It is an honor to have you here, sir. The title hit the crowd like a shockwave. Davies' jaw hung open. A two-star admiral, saluting upward award, a retired enlisted man. Impossible, unthinkable, but true. Reynolds kept the salute held as he addressed the stunned corridor. For those who don't know, he said, voice ringing with fierce pride, you are looking at one of the founding members of SEAL Team 2, Master Chief Carl Whitman. His record is mostly classified, but what I can share is this. He carries the Navy Cross, 3 silver stars, 5 bronze stars, all with the V for Valor. While I was worried about passing algebra, he was fighting waist-deep in the Mekong Delta. He lowered his salute. This man is not a mere visitor. He is not just a civilian. He is a living legend of the United States Navy, and he is my hero. Then he turned his fury back on Davies. Your name? Davies. Sir. Petty Officer Second Class, he whispered. Petty Officer Davies, the Admiral said, voice cold enough to freeze steel. You will report to my office at 0800 with your chain of command. You will explain how you decided that a man with more combat experience than this entire hallway combined was a liar. You mistook quiet dignity for weakness. He stepped closer. You are a disgrace to that uniform. Get out of my sight. Davies fled, humiliated. Reynolds watched him go, but then felt a gentle hand on his arm. Carl, easy. Jimmy, the old Master Chief said softly. The kid was just doing his job, a little too zealous. Sure, but the rules exist for a reason. He was protecting the house. Reynolds looked at him, shame softening his anger. He put you in cuffs, Carl. He humiliated you. Carl chuckled faintly. Not the first time. Won't be the last. Uniforms change. Kids get younger, but the mission stays the same. He patted Reynolds' arm. He was protecting the house. You can't blame a man for that. As Carl said the words, another memory surfaced sharp, vivid, but warm instead of painful. He was back in a cramped makeshift hooch near the Cambodian border, lit by a single buzzing bulb. A fellow frogman more brother than friend sat, hunched over his arm with a tattoo. Gun cobbled together from a tiny motor and a sharpened needle. The steady buzz, the sting of ink, and the laughter of men who lived every day on the razor's edge came flooding back. That tattoo was never meant to impress anyone. It wasn't a trophy. It was a quiet emblem of a brotherhood forged in darkness and saltwater. A mark of a promise made to the men beside him. I will always have your back. The aftermath of the security incident moved quickly. Vice Admiral Reynolds did exactly what he'd sworn to do. He turned the situation into a hard lesson for the entire base. A new mandatory security training module rolled out, focusing on veteran awareness, de-escalation skills, and most pointedly the heritage and insignia of naval special warfare. Carl Whitman's case became a whispered cautionary story in every classroom. A formal letter of apology, signed personally by the Admiral, arrived at Carl's modest home. He read it once, folded it carefully, and tucked it into a shoebox filled with old papers and memories. About a week later, Carl was sitting outside a small cafe, enjoying the warm Florida sun. He was watching traffic drift by when a shadow fell over his table. Looking up, he saw a young man in plainclothes jeans, a polo shirt, and an expression full of nerves. It took Carl a moment to recognize him without the uniform or the bluster. Davies. The young man looked stripped of arrogance, weighed down instead by exhaustion and genuine remorse. Master Chief Whitman, he asked softly. Carl nodded. Sir, I just wanted to find you and apologize for everything. The way I treated you, there's no excuse. I was wrong, and I'm truly sorry. Carl studied him for a long moment. He didn't see a villain, just a young sailor who had messed up badly and paid for it in a very public way. He gestured toward the empty chair. Sit down, son. Let me buy you a coffee. Davies hesitated, then lowered himself into the seat, as if expecting to be reprimanded again. Carl returned with 2 cups of black coffee and set one in front of him. For a moment, they sat quietly. the sound of distant traffic filling the silence. "The hardest thing to learn," Carl said at last, his eyes drifting toward the horizon, "isn't spotting an enemy. You figure that out pretty quick. The real challenge, the one that takes a lifetime's learning to see the person right in front of you, their past, their pain, their reasons." He took a slow sip of coffee and offered a gentle, forgiving smile. "You learn that, and you'll make a fine leader someday." He leaned back, settling comfortably into his chair. "Now tell me about yourself, Petty Officer Davies. Where are you from?" The story of Carl Whitman reminds us that the greatest heroes rarely flaunt their accomplishments. Their strength lies in quiet dignity, humility, and the grace they show others. If this story touched you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Nexo Stories for more inspiring stories of courage and character.